Welcome to Marvel News, presented by SuperheroNews.com. My name is Sean Gerber, and I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Paul Hermann. How's it going, Paul?
It is. It's going well. I'm really tired. I've been getting up early and just not sleeping the best. So I've been going to bed at 10:30 every night. So I'm struggling. Not gonna lie, I'm struggling.
Well,
so
it's good that you get your excuse out of the way for the crappy performance our listeners are about to hear. So good job on that.
Yes. Oh,
but
wow.
To help make up for Paul, I brought in a ringer. So bringing back royalty to the Marvel News podcast, the King of Cranes himself, Chris Clow. How's it going, Chris?
It's going all right. Thank you for bringing me back. I appreciate it. It's been a long time, but ready to jump in.
Well, freshly back from the royal wedding. Congratulations.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, it was almost everything I could have asked for. Obviously, I would have liked to have you there, Sean, but it was almost perfect. Almost.
Yeah, and that was it. It really sucked that I wasn't able to get there, especially because it would have been nice to see you formally become outranked in the in the Castle Crane.
You were there in spirit, though.
I was.
Absolutely.
So, and I'm definitely proud of your demotion. So that's really exciting. So
I am too. Enough.
Yeah. Well, wearing the crown's hard, man. It's heavy. So it's good to just pass it off to somebody else and let them be responsible for it. So anyway, what we're going to talk about this week, we're going to react to the brand new trailer for Spider-Man Homecoming, as well as some other Spider-Man news that came out earlier today. And then we will be talking about Season 1 of Iron Fist, which will be spoiler heavy, but we'll let you know before we start talking about it. So that way, if you haven't started it or haven't finished it or otherwise do not wish to be spoiled about the show, you'll be able to check out at that point. But we begin with the new trailer for Spider-Man Homecoming, and I will throw this to our resident Spider-Man guy, Paul. Paul, what'd you think?
Well, it's funny because I watched this trailer in the morning, as I'm getting dressed for work, and it's just not the best way to watch a trailer, right? It's not. I kind of wish they would have waited till this, later this afternoon, so I could really, sit down on my TV and watch it. But as I'm frantically getting ready for work, I watch it on my phone, but this is probably one of the times that I'm kind of glad I watched it and had time to think about it, because as I drove to work, I was listening to the radio and other, some podcasts or whatever. I got kind of thinking about the trailer itself, thinking about, the show tonight that we were going to do and what I was going to say, and, to watch it when I got home. And one of the things that really stuck out to me was the fact that, obviously, and this is going to be a common thing people are going to have to complain about, is that there's a lot of Tony Stark in this. And I was kind of surprised when, he basically takes away the Spider-Man suit, like the amazing, no pun intended, Spider-Man suit. And it was interesting because my initial gut reaction after the first time I watched it, I'm like, oh, seriously? And so, but as the trailer went on, I'm like, oh, okay. And he dons his old crappy suit or whatever. And something clicked in my head, and I'm like, okay, I get it. I get it now, and I love it. And basically, a lot of people complained about, shoehorning Iron Man into the Spider-Man movie to give Spider-Man this, mentor, father figure, and that's not really from the comics or whatever. And I think
continue.
It's not. It's not.
In its own way, it's a take on something that is in the comics.
Yeah, but when Spider-Man's 25, no, that's not. It's different when you're in 16.
No.
But it is.
I'll get to it.
But regardless, so what I'm saying is that for me, for a young Spider-Man, he never. And again, for the Spider-Man that I knew, didn't have that growing up as Spider-Man. He relied on himself and his own, basically, he's fixing up his own costume. He's making his own webbing. He's his own man. And one of the things I liked about this trailer is the fact that, and what they're going to give me is that they're still going to do that in this movie, and that he's still going to become his own man. And they basically hint at that the whole time when he's telling, I'm not sure who he's talking to at that point, but he's basically saying, I gotta do this myself. And I don't know. There's something about the fact that they're still going to give us the independent Spider-Man, because he's always been his own man. Like, Spider-Man has never had, again, he's tried to join super teams, the Fantastic Four, when he first came in to, again, in the 616 universe. Join the Fantastic Four. It didn't happen. He quasi joined the Avengers at some point, and 10 years later. And he just never had that mentor-like figure. He's always been kind of a solo kind of hero. And I think that we're still going to get that in some aspects in this movie. And I think that's an important aspect of this movie, it sounds like. So actually, I love the trailer. Everything else was great. I mean, it's all the shots you want to see in a Spider-Man movie, like, him just kicking butt and everything. It's awesome. So I loved it. I'm not sure if that flying spider thing was supposed to be a spider tracer or not. I'm assuming it is. But yeah, I loved it. I thought it was great. I mean, it's no surprise. I guess I would love this, but I think there's a lot of unwarranted complaining about the mentor figure, to be honest. I don't mind the mentor figure necessarily, but yeah, I think that it's great, and I think it's what they're doing with it. It's going to work in the movie.
Well, I loved the trailer so much. Like, I really loved it. And of course, if you want to see my reaction to seeing it for the first time, you can watch that on the Superhero News YouTube channel. But anyway, I loved it. I had a blast with this trailer, and I thought it had everything that I would have wanted from a trailer for the first standalone film of Spider-Man being in the MCU, because it had like you mentioned, the great action shots and all the great spectacle that we've come to expect from Spider-Man, except I think this is even this actually looks like it could be some of, like, a few of the best action scenes we've ever had in any Spider-Man movie, I think is what we could be in store for us in this film. But I love the story that this is telling. Like, I know the two main complaints that are out there about this trailer is that they maybe show too much by mapping out a lot of the major beats of the story, from Spider-Man being in high school and learning to be the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man that Tony Stark wants him to be, then maybe biting off more than he can chew, gets the suit taken away, and he comes back and fights Vulture in his original homemade costume. So I understand that complaint, and I also understand the Stark complaint, but those are not issues for me in just tackling them one at a time. The reason I don't mind mapping out the story beats is I think from a marketing perspective, that's actually pretty smart, because I think that at this point, now that we've had already 5 solo Spider-Man films since 2002, plus a sixth film in which he appeared in Civil War last year, I mean, mainstream audiences have been watching Spider-Man almost every other year since 2002. So at this point, you can't just sell them on the concept of Spider-Man. You have to sell them on the new story that you're telling. So I understand why a trailer for a Spider-Man movie might have to give away a little bit more of the plot than, let's say, just the second Guardians of the Galaxy movie. So I get that, and that's why I don't have as much of a problem with it. Plus, more importantly than that, the story looks interesting. I love the story that they're advertising in this trailer. So if as long as the story is good, then I'm fine with them showing me maybe a little bit more of it than I would have initially asked for. But then again, it's not about selling it to me, because my ticket was bought and paid for the second they said we're making a new Spider-Man movie. So I don't care. I don't mind that part. And then the Tony Stark stuff, I disagree. Like, when people say that's not from the comics, it is in its own way. It is the MCU version of something that did happen in the comics. One of the first things Spider-Man tried to do when he got his powers in the Stan Lee, Steve Ditko stuff was he went and tried to join the Fantastic Four.
But why? But why did he join? Why did he want to do that? He wanted to make money.
Well,
that's why he did it. He wasn't trying to be a superhero to do anything else. He wanted to make money.
But he also thought he was good enough to be part of it. So yeah, like, there was the money part of it. So, like I said, it's not a literal translation of what happened in that story, but there is that similar concept of Spider-Man Peter Parker wanting to go and play with the big dogs. That is part of Spider-Man. That is part of early Spider-Man, and this is the MCU take on it. Now, it's obviously different. The motivation is a little different because, let's be honest, Peter Parker was kind of a dick in a lot of those early Stan Lee, Steve Ditko issues.
He was.
He was. So they're getting rid of some of that, and they're giving him a more genuine, a nicer reason, a less cynical reason for wanting to join up with the big dogs. But then then Tony Stark is taking the place of the Fantastic Four, and the Avengers are taking the place of the Fantastic Four, A, because there is no Fantastic Four in the MCU, and B, the Tony Stark / the Avengers represent what the FF represented at that time. At that time, Fantastic Four was the top Marvel comic, so they were the top Marvel team. They would be the team that, plus they were in New York with Spider-Man, so that would be the team that Spider-Man would want to join. In the MCU, that team would be the Avengers, and it would be specifically Tony Stark. So I love all that. And, as far as, maybe going straight into the team-up stuff, keep in mind that when we met Peter Parker in Civil War, he had already had his powers and been Spider-Man on his own for 6 months. Like, we're skipping through the stuff where Spider-Man was on his own at the very beginning. We're not watching from the very beginning. We're skipping through that because we've seen various iterations of that on film already. So we are just moving past that into this next phase. And I think this is such an important story to tell with Spider-Man because this is such a huge part of who Peter Parker is. And we kind of talked about this during the last trailer, and I think this one just plays up more of it and just drives that point home of a huge part of Peter Parker is that insecurity that he feels. And especially as a high school kid, when you have that urgency to prove that you are as grown up as you think you are, even though you most likely are not. But then you also have that insecurity as you start to realize that you are not as grown up as you think you are. You are not as grown up as you wanted to believe you are. Because that's what's all over this trailer. Peter Parker's like, so now I get to join the Avengers? What do I got to do? And Tony Stark is telling him basically slow your roll. And then he ultimately finds out that he's not ready, and he has that insecure moment of, well, I'm nothing without the suit. And then Tony says, well, if you're nothing without the suit, then that just shows you shouldn't have it. And I love all of that because that is such a huge part of Peter Parker that in his mentality that could not happen in the other solo films because there were no other heroes for him to compare himself to. But in the comics, he does compare himself to other heroes a lot, and he always sees himself as coming up short. And that plays into Peter Parker's identity. And I love that now gets to be explored in the MCU. And if you're going to do that, the best person to do that with is Tony Stark, is the high-profile guy, is the guy that science nerd Peter Parker would look up to in every way, not just because of being a superhero in Iron Man, but also just Tony Stark being the renowned science genius that he is. So all of those reasons why Peter Parker would have Tony Stark as an idol and want to impress him and want to be an equal, a peer of Tony Stark, and how much it would hurt for him to realize that maybe he's not there yet. All of that stuff I think is so rich for the storytelling, and I love that this movie is going to explore that. I don't think that Tony Stark is going it's not like Tony Stark is going to be in every scene of this movie. Peter Parker still has to go to high school. Like, Tony Stark isn't going to be hanging out at Peter's high school all day. Like, there's going to be plenty of scenes that don't have Tony Stark. We've probably seen through these two trailers, we've probably already seen at least glimpses of most of Tony Stark's scenes in this movie, and everything else is going to be either maybe a couple other small appearances of Stark here or there, but mostly not. But I think that is such a great story that's never been explored before in Spider-Man films, and now this is the opportunity to do it in the MCU. So I love that they're doing it, and I love how they're doing it. So before I get into, and that's not even dealing with Michael Keaton as the Vulture, but before we get into that, I'll let Chris throw in his opening remarks on it.
Yeah, I'm more excited than I've ever been for a Spider-Man movie since 2002.
Boom.
Basically.
I like how you leaned into that with like,
yeah, see, I like to zig when you think I'm zagging, you know?
It worked. That was a Paul Hermann tweet trailer reaction, is what that was.
that really was. Excellent move.
Oh, man, that's true. So true. How many shield throws? I'm never gonna live.
Notice that I don't complain about that anymore because they do it all the time. Notice.
That's right. But we also have no complaints about Spider-Man's crotch this time around, so that's also
that is true as well.
Yeah.
Man, that brings back memories. Anyway, well, I mean, I think part of the reason that I'm so excited for this is, before I get into the specifics of the trailer itself, I'm just so thrilled about the fact that we're actually getting a Peter Parker in high school who actually looks like he's in high school. Yeah. He's not, a 30-year-old who says he's 18.
He's not he's not 90210ing it.
No. Not at all. And I'm almost 30, so I'm not saying it out of spite.
Shut up.
Almost 30.
I'm almost 30. I'm almost 30. Shut up. God, I hate your guts.
What happens when I become 30? Never mind.
Turn into a pumpkin. That's what happens. Take it from me.
And he'd be old and bitter like the rest of us.
Yes.
I look forward to it. Anyway. I mean, just the fact that conceptually we're finally getting a Spider-Man who is pretty representative of the first 100 or so issues of Amazing. And admittedly, though, I have not read all of the first 100 issues of Amazing. I'm actually trying to right now, but the feeling of adventure, the feeling of excitement, even I mean, I guess that you don't necessarily have to read those first 100 issues. Obviously, they were very informative, but you sort of get that impression with the first, 12 or so issues of the original Ultimate Spider-Man series. I thought Bendis did a pretty good job with that. Mm-hmm. But we're finally getting that in a movie, and it feels more truthful just on its face for that reason primarily. But also, I loved the poster where he's listening to music and you can see Avengers Tower in the background, because it emphasizes we're in a shared universe. And that's something that I think millions of fans across the world have wanted to see from Spider-Man for a long time. I mean, he's been a key element of pretty much every single summer crossover event since the first one that Marvel ever did, that comics ever did. And he plays well in those wider casts. So that kind of feeds into the Tony Stark complaint in this trailer specifically, because, I mean, we've had now almost 15 years of Spider-Man movies on a relatively nonstop basis. I mean, there's a gap here and there, of course, but we've never seen a crossed over Spider-Man before. So I guess I don't really feel any sort of annoyance or rage, if you can even call it that, from the people who do feel it, about Spider-Man interacting in a more direct way with a character like Tony Stark. And with Cap, I loved seeing the Cap nod. That made me laugh out loud.
I wish they would have saved that for the movie.
Yeah, probably, but I liked it. I mean,
I love it too. I love it too. I just wish they would have saved it.
I can understand that. It didn't quite bother me in that way, but I think that's totally valid. So on those two bases alone, that has me infinitely more excited for Spider-Man Homecoming than I love Spider-Man 2. I didn't know I was going to love it as much as I did when I saw it, but I was not as excited for any Spider-Man movie since the original one as I am for this one. So, and I was in 8th grade when Spider-Man came out, so that's saying something.
God, I hate your guts.
I'm really not trying to throw shade at the age thing. I'm really not. And I'm not even a young guy anymore, all right? We all have to...
I'm not even young. I'm not even 30.
I'm not as young as I used to. Son of a bitch. I can't walk my way out of this. I just can't.
You can't. Not with me, Chris. You should know this by now. Come on.
But anyway, as far as the trailer itself goes, I can see why some people would say that it's a little too spoilery, but I've never really gotten, in hindsight, from every MCU movie thus far, I've never felt like a trailer gave the whole movie away. So
right.
I have a hard time thinking that they're just going to start doing that all of a sudden. They've been doing this now for almost 9 years, and they've had a pretty solid track record thus far. So I don't think they're automatically going to just start screw it up when they finally have access to a character that is arguably the mascot of Marvel Comics. I just don't think that's going to happen. Well, some people might say Wolverine, but I mean, it's either Wolverine or Spider-Man. Well, I mean, it's Spider-Man for all intents and purposes. I hold no weird images about that. It's Spider-Man. So the trailer is really, really encouraging. Vulture looks eminently interesting, especially with some of the things that he said. We didn't get much more than we did in the last trailer, but we got enough that we're starting to get a pretty decent perspective on how he can prove to be an enemy to both Iron Man and to Spider-Man. It looks like it's going to be more of a personal sort of animosity between he and Spider-Man, and more generally widely philosophical with Iron Man. And that's cool to me. I don't know if Iron Man and Vulture are going to have any FaceTime. I would guess they'd have some, but either way, the fact that he has beef with the Avengers in general, or at least seems to have beef with the Avengers in general, or maybe the superhero community at large, that's a pretty interesting angle for a conflict. And the fact that we have Michael Keaton playing the Vulture is still mind-blowing to me.
Yep.
In all good ways. I mean, it's so cool that he's willing to do another movie like this and in a role like this. So I think it's probably going to be a little bit of a departure from the way comics fans are used to seeing the Vulture, but that's okay. I mean, they've done that several times before in the MCU, and I don't think that it's ever really led to anything particularly bad. So I'm looking forward to it, especially an actor of Keaton's caliber.
Vulture looks 1,000 times better than anything he ever did in the comic books.
Yeah, I mean, bald dude in green leotard isn't like, who was desperate to see that?
God,
besides
besides
a bunch of liars, like
not even that.
Seriously,
bald senior citizen in a green leotard.
Yeah, true.
Exactly.
Been so old.
I mean, even though I just did, not to disparage the original design of Vulture, but there's nothing wrong with going in a more having it be a little more modern, and it also plays into how he fits in the MCU. And I like the angle that they've taken. First off, by casting Michael Keaton, because whatever role you have, he makes it better. But second is I like that they're going with this kind of average guy, like everyman type of thing, which, by the way, Michael Keaton has done a great job playing a bunch of different types of the everyman throughout his career. So he's really, really good at that. As he's good at many things. But so I love that because he can give as Michael Keaton always tends to do, like there's a certain kind of gravitas and a certain kind of presence that he's able to give characters that otherwise wouldn't have any. So there's that part of it that Michael Keaton brings, but even with the creative approach to this and their take on the character of this guy who, in order to feel, he's almost poor Lex Luthor in the way that he is feeling inadequate as a result of all these superpower beings showing up on the planet over the past several years, and his way of kind of taking back control of that and feeling more power, especially as because I know they gave more background that he had a company that was kind of helping with cleaning up after superhero messes, and then Tony Stark has a bigger company, which I guess they've now confirmed is Damage Control. So I guess that
cool.
I guess that TV show's not happening, but so I guess that got taken by the movies. But anyway, I love that his way of kind of reacting to that and trying to take power back is using this alien weaponry. So he's got a lot of the alien technology from the Chitauri invasion and whatever else he's been able to pull together, and he's backed by the Tinkerer and Shocker. And I love the way that they're approaching this, and that it kind of is that mirror effect, holding up that mirror to Peter Parker of both of them. Granted, there is an age gap, but both of them just being kind of regular people who they each have in their own way have their extraordinary abilities or extraordinary resources, but they of course do very different things with them. And I think it's going to be really interesting to watch that play out. And then of course with everything that Keaton will bring to it, he's just going to elevate it, several levels above wherever it could have been, which is already, I think, a strong. They already have a strong foundation on the creative, and Keaton just enhances it.
You know who that kind of reminds me of, just thinking conceptually? Because Toomes was a pretty intelligent guy in the comics, obviously.
Oh, yeah, so totally.
They're going in a little bit of a different direction with it. It kind of reminds me of Leonard Snart. It sort of reminds me of the way that Captain Cold, he's a blue-collar villain, right? But he just he figured out through disassembling and reassembling his cold gun enough times how to work it. Yeah. So it's like that on a bigger scale, which I think works. I mean,
well, I'm not sure anything about Captain Cold, but Adrian Toomes was he was like an engineer. I mean, that's what he was.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm not sure if Captain Cold was that, but one of the things about
but he was also originally backed by the Tinkerer. That's been part of him from the beginning as well.
Right. He
wasn't doing it by himself.
Well, one of the things that about the little performances we've seen of Michael Keaton as the Vulture is that, and that keeps in the continuity with the comic book actually, is the fact that he is ruthless. That's what, you get from Michael Keaton that this guy is like, he said, don't mess with me, I'll get you and your family, or whatever he says. And that's exactly what, the Vulture would do if you get on his bad side. He has no problem. He basically has nothing to lose. So I don't know. That's always been my thing about the Vulture. When I read him in the comic books, it was like he was someone who, if you got on his bad side, he wouldn't mind murdering your whole family. Like that was kind of like his thing. So the fact that, and here's like I said, the costume, everything you could have redone it. It was fine. And they've been trying to revamp the Vulture for literally since I can remember.
Oh my God.
Mid-90s. I mean, they made him young. They probably had a brand new Vulture with it spit like venom out of his mouth.
Yeah, and thank God they didn't do that. It would have been so easy to be like, we need a scary monster in this.
Right.
I'm so glad.
But and to be honest, they had to do something, because it's like Sean said, like anyone who wants to see a guy in a green leotard and a big flapping feathers, that's their line. So they went the best route. They went the Iron Man route and had him be kind of based in, around Iron Man a little bit, which is it's obviously a departure, but it's a welcome departure, and I think it's going to enhance. I think it's a fantastic design. I think they need to incorporate this into the comic books as soon as possible, to be quite honest, and I know they're going to, so I can't wait. So, Keaton looks amazing. He's chewing up scenery. He's like in football terms, a running back who just chewing up the yards. He's just getting like 4 or 5 yards of carry.
I can see that too, but I mean, there's attitudes that some actors have when they go into comic book movies, right? I mean, it's the whole thing of John Glover saying on the set of Batman and Robin, Joel Schumacher screamed in a megaphone, "Remember, everybody, it's a cartoon." And it would give people license to go nuts. And there are actors who just step into comic book roles. But the really interesting and I guess kind of meta textual thing about Keaton's casting is that he's been here before. And he looks like he's going bigger in this, but that's probably also kind of required by the role that he's playing. But I don't know if he's actually going to end up being as much of a scenery chewer as this trailer seems to sort of indicate he will be, just because he was very reserved the last time that he was in a comic book movie in comparison. I kind of think he's going to strike a pretty decent balance. Maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I fully admit that's a totally distinct possibility, but he knows what he's doing. Virtually every case.
No, and then the thing is, the scenes we're getting though, like every scene he's in, he's just, I don't know, like he's given off a gravitas a little bit, especially in this one. Yeah. Like when he's talking about Tony Stark or whatever, and he's just like, just the way he's talking, it feels right. Don't get me wrong. I'm not. And when I say he's chewing up scenery, it's like I think that's an ultimate compliment.
Well, it's not. It's what Keaton does, and Keaton is the kind of guy. He's the kind of guy who is able to get away with it in a way that a lot of other actors can't. Like, he chews scenery in such a charismatic and entertaining way that you don't care that that's what he's doing. Like that. Sure. A lot of other people, if they're doing it, you're very aware that they're doing it while they're doing it, and also aware that you don't necessarily like that they're doing it while you're doing it. But that's not really.
But he also understands where viciousness comes from, because every time I've heard, "Don't mess with me," it's enough to send a chill down your spine.
Yeah, well, there's that. Plus, there's also, and kind of like you mentioned before, I mean, he's been there before. He gets this genre, but what he also gets from his own experience is he gets that there's a way to celebrate how weird and crazy all of this is without turning it into a cartoon. Like, he knows he knows where the line is, and where a lot of actors don't. And I think that's going to be that is going to be a huge strength of this film. So I'm really excited. I mean, overall, I think the Spider-Man Homecoming trailer looks great. I think we're in for a real treat on July 7th. But before we start talking about Iron Fist, there's one other topic that I want to get to, which is the other news about Spider-Man that came out today. And we'll get everybody's take on this. This trailer premiered last night or the night before we're recording this episode, at CinemaCon, which is the big convention for movie exhibitors in Las Vegas every year. And the studios come out and they present and show these exhibitors what they're going to be putting in their movie houses over the next couple years. And it was for Spider-Man Homecoming last night, Kevin Feige was there, Tom Holland was there, director John Watts was there, and Kevin Feige, and the other, besides Feige, the other producer on Spider-Man Homecoming is Amy Pascal, who was formerly the boss at Sony Pictures. And they also did little interviews for Sony that Sony ended up putting online for media to go ahead and post. And she made a comment that had people thinking about the future of Spider-Man in the MCU, or perhaps lack thereof. Here's what she said, quote, "One of the things that I think is so amazing about this experience is that you don't have studios deciding to work together to make a film very often. In fact, it may never happen again after we do the sequel." End quote. So, of course, the internet did what the internet does, which is freak out about this. And right away I saw the headlines going, Spider-Man is done. Spider-Man to exit the MCU after Homecoming sequel and all this other stuff. And my response to all of this is pump the brakes, because once again, everybody seems to, or a lot of people seem to have forgotten what the original deal was. Because if you actually remember what the original Sony, Marvel, Disney deal was, this actually isn't bad news. It's actually kind of good news, because in the original deal, we weren't going to get an MCU Spider-Man Homecoming sequel. Like, the original deal was a one-for-one deal. If you go back to the original press release, and I'm not going to read it all for you here, but the original press release was a one-for-one deal. It was Spider-Man appearing in a Marvel film that would be distributed by Disney, which ended up being Captain America Civil War, and then Marvel Studios would make a film, a Spider-Man standalone film that Sony would distribute. There was the possibility of other films in the future, but the actual deal itself was a one-for-one, and we got that with Civil War and now Spider-Man Homecoming. And that's why even up to several months ago, there was some question as to whether or not Spider-Man would be in Infinity War and Avengers 4. That question got answered officially when we saw Tom Holland on set when Marvel released that video for the start of production for Infinity War. So we knew that the deal had been extended somehow, and the obvious answer to that is in exchange for Spider-Man being available for Infinity War and perhaps Avengers 4, and then, of course, Sony gets an MCU Spidey sequel to Homecoming, which comes out, I believe, July 5th, 2019. So there's the good news that we're getting more of Spider-Man in the MCU than we were originally promised. And then as far as her comment about, it may never happen again after we do the sequel, all that means is that the deal doesn't go past Spider-Man Homecoming. But this has been short-term deal followed by short-term deal, followed by an extension to another short-term deal that could also potentially lead to another extension for a short-term deal. So I think, the idea that people are freaking out because we're not promised like 10 more years of Spider-Man in the MCU, we're not promised 10 more years of the MCU. Like, we think we'll get it, and we hope we'll get it as long as everything goes well. But Spider-Man's the same way. As long as everybody keeps making money off of this, then I think it will continue. If it reaches a point where it's no longer mutually beneficial for everyone involved, then it probably stops. But until we reach it, like if Spider-Man Homecoming is a massive hit and makes a bunch of money for Sony, they're not going to be looking to pull Spider-Man out of the MCU. And if Marvel continues to benefit from having Spider-Man in their films, the ones that are distributed by Disney, then it continues to work out. As long as the merchandise for Spider-Man goes up, that obviously Marvel's getting a huge cut of based on the Spider-Man films. Like, as long as all of that continues to work out, we are going to keep getting Spider-Man solo films that are set in the MCU. So there really is nothing to worry about. And in fact, Tom Holland's contract, I believe he had originally said it was for 6 movies. So he's already fulfilled. He's already done 2 of those movies if you count Homecoming this year. And then if you count a Homecoming sequel plus 2 more Avengers movies. So he's already going to be fulfilling most of his deal. Now we're already at 5 of his 6 films. So at the most, there would be 1 Spider-Man solo film left on Tom Holland's contract, and so maybe that last one potentially wouldn't be in the MCU, but that will probably still work itself out. The bottom line is there's nothing to really react to yet. There's no cause for alarm. What has actually happened is an extension of the original deal, which is good news, and there is no bad news yet, and it's just too early to tell what happens next. But that's true for a lot of things in the MCU. There are a lot of Avengers contracts that are about to expire that I also believe will be renewed and that I'm not really that worried about. There are a lot of other things that we're just not promised in the future, but we have everything we need right now through 2019, and that's a good thing, and then we'll worry about the rest when it comes time to worry about that.
I never once worried about when I read this. I just, like you, I'm just like, yeah, we'll see. I mean, yeah, if Homecoming and the Homecoming sequel don't do well, which I don't think Homecoming's going to do badly at all. I think it's going to do great, and I think the sequel, I'm assuming, will do great as well. If we assume that it's all roses from here on out with Spider-Man in the MCU, I have no reason not to believe that they're going to continue that. I know there's lots of weird side Sony stuff with the Venom and the Silver Sable and Black Cat, and Lord knows what else they'll try to do. I don't know, but to me, I think that as long as Spider-Man is doing well in the MCU, they have no reason to change it, because from what, like you explained before, there's not really, as far as I know, there's no money really exchanging. Like, Sony's still going to make the money off of Homecoming, but this that Disney gets to use Spider-Man in the other films is kind of the way it works.
Yeah, the way the money works is, like, as far as like who collects money off the distribution of the film, Disney gets all of the money without sharing anything with Sony of the team up films. Sony gets all of its distribution money from all the money that's entitled to as a distributor, and doesn't have to share anything with Disney. But keep in mind that a couple things. Disney gets a nice share of Spider-Man merchandise revenue from Spider-Man movies, which is part of the reason why they're more readily going to back Spider-Man as opposed to X-Men, where they don't have as great of a cut on merchandise, which is why you always get more Spider-Man movie merchandise than you've ever got X-Men movie merchandise. So there's that part of it. Then there's the, but in addition to, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought here and trying to catch back up. But no, like I think the other part of it, though, is that Marvel Studios is the production company actually making the film. And when you are a production company, you get paid for this. You get paid to make the film for the distributor. So Marvel Studios is everybody who's an employee of Marvel Studios who's doing work on Spider-Man Homecoming. They are getting paid for their work on the film. So it's not like there's no money coming into the Disney organization as a result of this. So that's why there is still some benefit to Marvel Studios making these movies, even though Sony's going to be collecting a lot of the big paychecks as a distributor, but they're also absorbing a lot of the biggest risks, like having to pay, this time they're the ones footing the expensive bill for Robert Downey Jr. instead of Disney. So there are plenty of benefits for both of them as a result of this.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that, to me, as long as they're being successful with it, and they can, and these movies are profitable, and they make way more than Amazing Spider-Man 2, and they can still have the other Marvel characters that Disney and Marvel Studios really couldn't care less for, like a Black Cat and a Silver Sable and a Venom and things like that. I mean, these are characters. I highly still doubt that they'll even make those movies besides Venom, which Venom without Spider-Man is still just the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. But to me, it's this. It's you have. Why break up a good thing if it's there? I mean, you have everything is in the short term for their own benefit. So, excuse me. As long as it's making tons of money and it's profitable, they're not going to stop. When it stops being profitable, and it's just like Amazing Spider-Man 2, when it stopped being profitable and they realized all their plans for a connected universe just fell right on their face. They went running to Marvel and said, well, let Spider-Man be part of your thing, or whatever. I mean, it sounds like they were desperate. And now they're getting Spider-Man back into everyone's good graces, and maybe they're going to try to use this as a springboard. Who knows? But I just don't see it. You keep things short term, smart business wise. So if you don't want to continue, you don't have to continue. And after Spider-Man Homecoming 2, if Spider-Man if Homecoming 2 is awful, then you know what? Then yeah, it'll go back to Sony. And at that point, who knows what shape the Marvel Cinematic Universes will be in. But at that, I highly, highly doubt at this point that's going to happen.
I wouldn't worry about it. I mean, well, all I really have to say is one thing, at least for Homecoming. I mean, Spider-Man plus Robert Downey Jr.
Here comes the money.
That's all I gotta say.
Yeah,
that's perfect. That's perfect.
Yeah, no, there's nothing again. Well, and as long as the money keeps coming, then everybody's fine. I think the thing that would start having me worry about it is if Spider-Man Homecoming only makes about the same amount of money as the last couple Amazing Spider-Man films made, without any MCU bonus, or without, and certainly without Iron Man kicking in extra cash. Like, so if that doesn't prove to be worth extra money to Sony, then I could see them rethinking whether or not they want to, continue to do this deal. But so until we even see the box office of Spider-Man Homecoming, there's really no need to worry that this might end anytime soon. And plus, there are, as we know, several more appearances of Spider-Man in the MCU between now and then before we even have to possibly worry about that relationship coming to an end. So it's all just premature at this point, and I'm just happy that we're at least getting another Spider-Man standalone film after this one that's going to be set very firmly within the MCU. And now we will turn our attention towards Iron Fist. And like I said at the top of the show, this is a spoiler discussion, so if you have not completed the series and you still plan to and don't want to be spoiled for any episodes or any of the events that unfold over the course of those 13 hours on Netflix, then this is the point at which I recommend you pause the show and then come back to it once you have finished the series. But if you have already finished it, or you otherwise do not mind being spoiled, then please feel free to continue. So this is your last warning, and at this point, if you are spoiled, it is completely your fault. So, Iron Fist. I went into this series with a little bit of trepidation, not just because the reviews were terrible going into it, but I had my own issues. If you go back to our previous Marvel News episodes,
I remember.
None of the... Yeah, I know. We were... in the same way that Paul hasn't been so enthusiastic about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 trailers, my version of that has been the Iron Fist trailers. Just none of them really stood out to me in the way that I was hoping they would. And it didn't really diminish my interest because I, of course... kind of like I mentioned with Spider-Man before, like they had me at Iron Fist. As soon as they said they were making a show about Iron Fist, I was all about it. Going into this big deal between Marvel and Netflix, when they announced the 4 shows that they were going to do, Daredevil was the one I was most excited about, but in second place, right behind Daredevil, in a close finish, was Iron Fist. So I was still excited for the show, and even after the reviews, because I don't care that much about reviews ultimately, because ultimately it's going to come down to what I think of the show. And I have to say that while I disagree with the level of venom that has been spewed towards Iron Fist and the way a lot of reviews have characterized it as basically a total dumpster fire, I don't think it's a complete failure on that level. But just from a general sense, and we'll get into it more specifically, I understand why there were very negative reviews of Iron Fist, and I personally feel that while I liked a lot of things about the show, at the same time, it did not, for me, reach it failed to reach the bar. It wasn't, like I said, it wasn't a complete miss, but at the same time it did not reach the bar, and admittedly it is a very high bar that's been set by the other Netflix shows, but it didn't reach the bar that has been set by Marvel and Netflix's previous efforts in Daredevil, Jessica Jones, and Luke Cage. So, and I think there's a part of me that feels like if this had been the first Marvel Netflix show, that it might have been received a little better. Not like it would have been received as well as Daredevil was in its first season, but it might have been received a little bit better, because this Iron Fist, to me, before we get more specific with it, in a general sense, it's about on the level of a lot of like CW television stuff, which before Daredevil came out, that was largely acceptable because that was what we had at the time, was shows like Arrow. But I think now that we've seen what's available to us on Netflix with Daredevil and Jessica Jones and Luke Cage, getting something like Iron Fist does feel like a step down, and I think that's part of why the reaction to it has been so strong. And I don't want to take anything away from the people who love it, and I'm not trying to say that anybody who loves the show is wrong, but just my feeling on it is that while I like a lot of elements in the show, the overall 13 hours of television of streaming television just doesn't quite match the 13 hours that were offered by the other shows.
Yeah, people will know that I was very excited for Iron Fist. I love the character. I've read a lot of Iron Fist comic books, and I first started hearing about the negative responses. I didn't read any reviews really for the most part. I remember the day it came out, I listened to someone talk about it on a podcast, and I got a little discouraged, and I went in with a little bit low expectations. And I'll be honest, I think it's, it starts off rough, but it picks up mid season, and it kind of falters at the end. And that's the thing that's so disappointing, is that for me is I think Iron Fist is a really, really rich character, and I think that they downplayed the best parts of Iron Fist, in my opinion. And that's to me, one of the biggest problem with the show, is that all the things that you want to love about the character that makes the character unique, I think they just try to they're trying to prolong it and not, they want to make it a smaller story instead of make it a bigger story. And I know with that you have Daredevil was, you're trying to make it like Daredevil, but it's, Iron Fist is not Daredevil, unfortunately. In a series, in a comic book, as a character, they're very different characters, and you can tell a small Iron Fist story, but you're also eliminating a lot of the greater story aspects. I have a lot of things that I would have done differently that we'll eventually get into. I have literally a list of 3, 4, 5 things just off the top of my head that I know immediately what I would do, but I also think it's not as bad as everyone said it was. I really do think those first 2 episodes, specifically the first one, it just is a rough first episode. It's the roughest of all the series. There's no doubt that's the worst first episode out the gate. So I almost think that the critics, came in, saw this episode, and were like, this is garbage. And then just kind of, it takes a while to get into it. I don't think I really started getting a groove with the show up until the 3rd or 4th episode. And by the time I got to the 6th episode and the 7th, I started really, really digging what I was, watching. There's still a lot of problems in the show itself. And we'll get into those inconsistencies, but I don't think it was terrible. I don't think it was amazing. I think it was solid, to be quite honest. I don't think it's just dumpster fire like people kept saying. But there's definite problems in it, and there's definite things that we or they should be addressing if there is going to be a season 2, which there is. There should be a season 2 of Iron Fist. Whether you like it or you hate it, there should be a season 2, because the character is rich enough. There's enough they put into the season 1. A lot of stuff in season 1 that they can play up that could be amazing. And I really want to see that second season, and especially depending on what happens in Defenders. So, yeah, I know it's Chris. You're probably interested what you're thinking. You're not quite finished with the show, but I liked it. I'm curious where you're at with it.
Well, my exposure to Iron Fist is much more limited, because the only series I've read from beginning to end was Ed Brubaker and Matt Fraction's Immortal Iron Fist, which I absolutely adored. And it seemed like there was sort of a vibe like at least in the first couple of trailers, a David Aja kind of vibe in the design of the show. Full disclosure, yes, Paul's right. I have actually only seen in full the first 3 episodes, but a combination of my perspective on those 3 episodes and some weirdly specific spoilery Facebook and Twitter friends, I mean, I have a decent enough perspective, I think, of what follows. I'm going to watch the whole show eventually, but those first 3 in particular didn't give me a lot of incentive, I felt. It sounds like it picked up for you, Paul, by number 3, but I kind of got the opposite impression, largely because I think the first episode to me was extraordinarily frustrating with the way that it was written. I mean, no, I'm Danny Rand. Oh, you're crazy. No, you don't understand. I'm Danny Rand. Get out of here. No, you don't understand. I'm Danny Rand.
Yeah.
He's nuts. Call security. No, you don't understand. I mean, it kept going for a weirdly long time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I found myself getting irritated. And this was when I was at a hotel room in Anaheim getting ready to go to Disneyland. I didn't think anything could irritate me. I like theme parks. But
you say that like I think that's a weird thing to like.
It's the happiest place on earth.
It is.
But
so at least we all know that your day got better.
Oh yeah, totally. But I mean, so I definitely gave the second episode a try, the third one a try. Then I wasn't able to because I had to get on airplanes to go back home to Chicago. But like I said, social media kind of spoiled me on things that happen. And Sean, it's funny that you mentioned the CW because I found out almost immediately that we weren't getting any recognizable Iron Fist visual costume elements out of the show. At least not in like the traditional respect where we actually get to see him in costume. And the thing that immediately came to mind for me was Smallville. And one of the frustrating things is that I mean, overall, I thought Smallville was a good show, but in retrospect, especially in hindsight, the thing that frustrated me the most about it was the fact that it was timid and almost embarrassed by the fact that it was a show about Superman characters. It didn't want to go there. And coupling my knowledge of the fact that we don't get an Iron Fist costume with what I got from the first 3 episodes, it seems like it has an uncharacteristic timidity with the material for a Marvel show. I mean, Daredevil was so great. I mean, it was a transformative television style experience for a superhero because from the beginning we get a costume. We don't get the costume, but we get a costume that's recognizable from the comics, and it was completely in its element with being a superhero TV show. And the frustrating elements of the writing in the first 2 specifically, and by the 3rd episode it evened out a little bit, but not quite enough for my taste, along with the seeming timidity that it has to actually jump in and be a superhero show. And I mean, it's highly oriented towards martial arts, and I found the fights very, very unconvincing, which also surprises me coming off of Daredevil. I mean, conceivably, it's a lot of the same people that are actually putting these things together, and I was very dissatisfied with the way that Danny Rand's ability was showcased. Not even just Finn Jones doesn't bug me. I mean, some of the ways that he delivers lines seem a little on the nose, but I mean, if he had any shortcomings whatsoever with the fight choreography, I feel like they could have at least evened it out in the broadcast cut of each episode by going tighter on the camera. But they pulled out fully on a lot of those fights that I saw, and it didn't do it a lot of service. So, I mean, I'm going to give the show a proper shot. I think that I owe it that much, especially ahead of the Defenders. But from what I've seen so far, I mean, Daredevil hooked me immediately. Jessica Jones hooked me immediately. Luke Cage hooked me immediately.
Right.
Iron Fist did not hook me immediately. And from that basis alone, I feel disappointed. Without giving it a full grade because I haven't seen the whole thing, I feel weirdly disappointed by it in a way that those other shows have not disappointed me in the past.
Yeah, I think with Iron Fist, I mean, you mentioned it not grabbing you. Like, I was able to stop after 2 episodes with Iron Fist and like take a break for the day and then come back to it. I mean, I kind of needed to anyway, but I wasn't like, because I had other stuff to do, but like I wasn't mad that I had to put it down. You know, I wasn't upset that I was gonna, that like my binge was gonna have to be interrupted. Like it took me longer to get through Iron Fist than any of the other Netflix shows. So some of that was because actual life stuff going on that I had to take care of, but I think it kind of would have taken me about as long anyway, just because I didn't feel the same urgency to move through it, where the other shows I was like, great, and let's play the next one and the next one and the next one. Like I was really excited to just burn through the other shows, and that never really happened for me with Iron Fist. And I think there are elements that I like, so I want to start with that so it just doesn't feel like I'm just sitting here beating up on the show. I mean, I liked Jessica Henwick as Colleen Wing. Like her character worked for me. I thought she did a good job, and I did like a lot of Finn Jones as Danny Rand. Like in a lot of ways, he did kind of sound like I always kind of imagined Danny Rand sounding in my head. Like I thought that he gave, in some ways, he gave a good you know, there were elements to his performance that I did like, and there were moments in the show that I liked. And And I also ended up liking a character who I hated in the first couple episodes. I ended up really liking by the end of the show was Ward Meacham, who actually has the best constructed and most satisfying character arc of anybody on the show. But that's kind of a problem on a show called Iron Fist. So that's the thing, is like a lot of the elements that work very well in Iron Fist either aren't properly utilized, or they aren't necessarily the things that I was really counting on an Iron Fist show to do. Like, again, I don't care about Ward Meacham. Like, I don't know any Marvel fan who really cares that much about Ward Meacham. So giving him an interesting character arc, while that's fine, it almost felt like there was a lot of stuff they were having to do because they didn't have 13 hours of Iron Fist story to tell. And I think part of the reason for that, honestly, I think this is the first time we have seen the constraints of a Marvel Netflix budget. I think that happened on this series. I think that's why a lot of the stuff is not as satisfying. Like, we only get one truly great shot of the Iron Fist being used, and it happens in the last episode, and it's a shot we already saw in the trailer. Every other use of the Iron Fist is basically like, you know, busting through a door, popping open the back doors of a truck. Great. Like, that's not interesting. That's not the Iron Fist. It is not a lockpick. Like that. So some of that was, I was like, I guess that's all they had the money to do. I don't know, but I would have rather give me 6 episodes of jam-packed Iron Fist as opposed to 13 episodes. And I think that's the other thing, is they settled into the format of having 13 episodes with all of these series, because that was the deal that was made between Marvel and Netflix, is everybody gets 13 episodes except the Defenders gets 8 episodes. And this is one where I mean, I felt like Luke Cage was a little bit stretched and maybe could have cut a few episodes. I feel like Iron Fist could have been cut in half and might have actually been a more interesting show, because there's a lot of this show that is about Rand Enterprises that I just don't care about. Like, and it's, you know, when the Meachams lose Rand Enterprises, why do I care? They've been dicks the whole time. Like, why do I care? And there's no, I shouldn't have to really worry about the future of the Meachams. Like, that, I don't care.
Well, also, just as a side note, I know that there is an age difference, but Ward and Harold look like they're the same age. So it's really weird for me to see Ward calling Harold dad. Well, it's just like, you're both 45. I don't get it.
Well, one guy hasn't aged since he died 12 or 13 years prior. So I mean, there is a reason why they don't look. There is at least some. I shouldn't say scientific. Yeah, there is some explanation as to why.
I mean, we're talking about a world that's derived from Stanley saying, "At least I gave Thor a reason to fly. He throws his hammer." It's the hammer.
So no, I mean, and that's the other thing, is when you get to Harold Meacham, like I never bought into Harold Meacham as a villain in this, and especially because, like, a third of the way through the season, like, he just kind of disappears for a while, and it becomes about Madame Gao, and those are actually the episodes that work the best, is when it's Iron Fist going after Madame Gao. That little arc actually works pretty well for me, and I enjoyed those episodes. And then it switches to Bakuto and the Hand, and the Hand is kind of like what we thought in Daredevil, but oh no, it's kind of different. There's this Splinter faction, and it doesn't, and it just doesn't become as satisfying. And then the other stuff is, to your point before, I mean, the fight scenes. Iron Fist should have had the best fight scenes of any of these Marvel shows, but this show isn't able to really hold a candle to what was done in Daredevil. But like, Iron Fist is like, this is the kung fu show. Like, this needs to have the best stuff. And here's a good point where a costume would have come in handy.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
From a practical standpoint, and I've kind of hinted at this before, but then it became very apparent in watching the show. Daredevil has a costume and he wears a mask. Even when he didn't have a real costume and he just had the freaking black scarf over his head, that still worked, because you could have Charlie Cox doing what he was able to do, and then Chris Brewster or one of the other stuntmen to come in and do what Charlie Cox can't do, and you're able to have these awesome fight scenes. With Finn Jones, there's only so much you can do, because there's only so much you can do to hide a stuntman with all your quick cuts. What would have helped is if Iron Fist had a costume with his mask. And by the way, Danny Rand needs a mask in this show. He immediately becomes a high profile figure. Like within 3 or 4 episodes, someone finally believes him when he says, "I'm Danny Rand." Like, so when that finally happens, it's like, okay, he's high profile, and he is trying to conceal his identity by wearing a hoodie. So, by the way, if you want to cosplay on a budget and when I say budget, I don't just mean money, I also mean time. Just be your favorite Marvel Netflix superhero not named Daredevil. Throw on a hoodie or some jeans and a leather jacket, and you got it covered. But like Iron Fist could have, like, he had a practical reason to need a costume and a mask, and they didn't go for it. There's no reason for him not to have a costume or a mask, and if they had done it, that probably would have helped them out tremendously in making better fight scenes.
I mean, if Iron Fist gets a second season, or if it's in Defenders, I just want a fight scene to live up to how kick-ass Iron Fist is at Disney Infinity. That's I mean, that's all.
All right.
Anything.
That's enough out of you. That's enough out of that.
Hey,
okay,
look, here's Iron Fist in Disney Infinity is pretty badass, and he is better than what we got in this show.
Yeah,
I'm not going to argue that point, but here's my things, and that was one of the things I was going to talk about, Sean, of things that you could have made the show better, and what they can at least do in the next season of Iron Fist. And now these things are, I think, what make Iron Fist a great character or whatever. So the first thing I'll touch on is the same thing you brought up, was the mask. Why they didn't have him in some kind of mask to at least give you a stunt double to do the fight scenes for you is beyond me. And not just that, but you give Danny Rand the most distinct hair ever that it's almost impossible not to shoot around this guy. I mean, that's the thing. He's got JT hair from NSYNC bobbing his head around, and it's like it's like it doesn't make sense to me. It's obviously there's obvious scenes that it's not him.
JT moves better though, in all fairness.
Yeah, he does. He does. And here, I'm not a big Justin Timberlake fan, but he does. But the thing is this: he was training, hours. And we're talking like up to like he was just nonstop training for these fight scenes. And I almost feel like they did and I almost put this on the showrunner. And I don't know if it's a showrunner or if this is a Netflix, Jeff Loeb, Marvel TV studio Netflix deal, because it's almost like they want to hold off this costume for a very specific reason. And that's why I keep going back to Defenders. I think it was if he does get it in Defenders, I'm still doubting he does, which pisses me off to say. It's a mistake. It was a big mistake not to put him in it. And not only that, but you already are hinting at that costume when you see the reel when he goes to hand and Bakudo shows him what he could become, and you see the same actor, put it on Instagram what he looks like. He looked awesome. He looked totally fine. Like it was so frustrating to think you couldn't put him in a costume at all. Like, if of all the characters, Iron Fist and Daredevil are the two people that need to have costumes. And like you said, Sean, they had a reason to put them in a damn costume, and they didn't. And I just really felt like either the Marvel studios or whatever, or the TV studios or the showrunner were arrogant enough to think, oh, we're doing such a great job, we don't need a costume. It's like, no, you do. It would have made the series so much better. You could have made way better fight scenes. That's one thing I would have done. The second thing I would have done is less Meachums, which I understand why you need the Meachums, but you need less Meachums, which is, I think, obvious. More Davos. And the reason you need more Davos is because Davos was awesome.
Yes, he was.
I love a great character. But people don't realize is that this character is huge. Like, he's the Steel Serpent. He is the symbol of what the heroine, the snake symbol, that's his symbol that he adopts in the comic books. That's basically Iron Fist's arch enemy right there is Davos, and they were friends. They were, he's jealous of the Iron Fist.
And they already had an immediate reason for them to be in conflict.
Exactly.
I mean, Davos could show up in episode 2. If not 1, and initially be trying to get Danny back, and then it doesn't work, and then Davos just goes full blown bad guy. You could have done it. It was right. It was right there.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I was, because I remember, I went in, spoiler free, so I had no idea, who was cast as who. I just went in, and they kept showing this guy. I'm like, who the hell is this guy they keep showing? And then all of a sudden, he talks, it's Davos. I went, holy shit! I literally said, holy shit, it's Davos. That's awesome. And I loved it. They had a good chemistry, the two of them, and I loved the character. And the end, you have Joy Meacham and him kind of teaming up together, which again is very comic book accurate, because the Meachams do want Danny Rand dead, and they do get, they do kind of team up at some points in those series. But it's to me, it's like, why they didn't focus on that is beyond me. It's like totally beyond me, because he's a great character. And that's another reason why there has to be a season 2, because the Davos versus Iron Fist character, like imagine putting them both in costumes and Davos obtaining with Madame Gao, which they hint at the very end of the series.
Yeah, but now they're hooking him up with Joy Meacham. But why? Why?
Because she's going to help fund him in whatever he needs, but you have Madame Gao, who's probably going to help him obtain like the alternate Iron Fist.
Do that. Just do that.
What's
enough with the Meachams, though. That's the thing, is like the Joy Meacham, and that's the other thing that bugs me, is like the Davos thing was like strong enough by itself, and like bringing Joy Meacham into the end of it, like that wasn't even earned, because it's like Joy Meacham has no reason to be mad at Dany at the end. She already knew that her dad was setting Dany up, and she was upset with her dad for setting Dany up, and her brother is the one who killed Harold. So there really is, she has no reason whatsoever to be upset with Dany, and she's actually been the one who kind of liked Dany the whole time. So there is no emotional justification given for her turning on Dany Rand. It's just that we want to have some kind of exciting tease for next season. But Davos, like, I would have been way more excited if I see Davos like getting his symbol or doing something like I don't. It's like she was there just so Davos could say something, but it's like he doesn't need to say anything. There's a total there. You can just have him communicate, or have him go liberate Gao and have him do that. Like that, all of that is more interesting to me than let's keep the Meachams as part of this. It's like we told the story of the Meachams. We told that story. Yeah. Let's let it go. Like we spent more time on it than they spent more time on it than they ever needed to. Like, just let it be. Put Joy back in the company with Ward, and they're done, and we're moving on to actual Iron Fist kung fu problems.
Yeah, and to me, I think Davos is a strong enough character. You're going to have great storytelling. So the other things, and the next ones are very obvious. And but still, I think they should have focused on this over any of the Meacham stuff, cut some of those characters out. The Thunderer, his mentor, like give them the trademark mask, give them like the sense of why would Iron Fist have that mask in the first place. Show these characters of the mysteriousness of Kunlun, like in the comic books, the Thunderer and all his mentor and all the elders all wear creepy weird masks, and like it's very comic booky, but it actually, to me, it would make sense of why he would wear a mask as well, to honor the Kunlun tradition, and also the fact that just give a sense of mysteriousness to Kunlun even more. You mask these elders, what's underneath the mask, et cetera, et cetera. But you hint at you have Colleen Wing about to whack Danny Rand with a practice sword, and he just name drops the Thunderer, his mentor. Like, I've been hit many times. Lao King, I always mispronounce his name. I always call him the Thunderer. It's a lot easier for me to remember. But the Thunderer, he's whacked me many times with a practice sword, and I'm just like, yes. And they could have showed so many awesome flashbacks. Instead, we just get flashbacks of Danny Rand getting whipped a million times with like whips, and it's just what. I don't know. There's so much you could have shown with Davos, with the Thunderer, the mentor, the elders, Kunlun, the mask, the mysteriousness. You could have done so much with that, but they just dropped it. They went for a more straightforward, and I think it just because of that they really hurt themselves only. And again, you have the hint of the dragon, which is really, really freaking cool, but they don't show that. Like, it's almost, you're half-heartedly going into an Iron Fist show.
That's why I'm saying I think this was a money issue. I think they didn't have
absolutely.
I think they didn't have the money to do Kunlun. They didn't have the money. They certainly didn't have the money to do the dragon. Like, I think they simply ran, which is why all we get is a pair of glowing red eyes. Like, I think what this series proved is that this probably needed to be a movie. Like Iron Fist
absolutely.
Iron Fist probably needed to be a Marvel Studios movie because they, and I don't, and look, I understand, okay, like there's only so much money you can spend on a show like this and be able to financially justify it. And I get why, maybe going into this, they thought Danny Rand, Heroes for Hire, like maybe, that could have potentially worked. But I think what might have worked better because, what probably would have worked better in this one, because you're right, like you could just tell in watching this series what was missing. And there was no reason for it to be missing creatively. Like, the only reason it's missing is because they just probably didn't have the money to do it. Like, that's why I think it probably would have been better if Danny Rand had been introduced in the Defenders. And so that way it was more of like, hey, we don't have time to fill in all this because he's got to do this stuff with the Defenders, and introducing him there as a supporting character.
I like that a lot, actually.
And then going back and doing his own show. And
it's sort of like how they brought in the Martian Manhunter to the Justice League animated show.
And then it would have, what would have allowed you to do that is by the time before you even do Iron Fist season 1, you've already kind of introduced the present of this character in the Defenders. So then you don't have to worry as much about the origin. It's like you can just pick up on wherever he leaves off after Defenders. Like, you could go into Heroes for Hire, and it's Luke Cage and Iron Fist for 13 episodes. Like, something like that might have worked, and it would have made the stuff, like, if it wasn't just starting off with an Iron Fist solo series, all the things that are missing, there would have been more reasons for it other than they just probably couldn't do it in this show. And I think that's part of why some of this feels a little unsatisfying, is because, like, we're all used to boardroom scenes and whatever in superhero content. Like, we get it, it happens, and there's a certain amount of it that you have to do because you can't afford to do superhero stuff in every single scene. So I can understand all that, and I can forgive a lot of that, but it's harder to forgive that when there are other bigger elements to this that just feel like they need to be there and are not quite showing up. And it sucks because I feel like I'm just, I know that I'm just bashing on this show and being critical of it, but it doesn't come from a place of like, I hate this show. It comes from a place of, I still kind of like this show, but I wanted to love it the way that I loved all the other Netflix shows. And it doesn't have enough to get me to that level.
Well, the character is helping with part of that, I'm sure. Yeah. I mean, as you go into the story, if you have previous familiarity with who Danny Rand is, that does at least part of the work. I mean, that's the benefit of any superhero media, is that where most of the time filmmakers or television creators have to do a lot of work to get you initially invested in the character, previous familiarity does part of that work for you. But thinking about the things that you guys are saying and the comparisons that we've already made before, I mean, Paul said half-hearted, and I already made the Smallville comparison. Sean, you made the CW comparison.
I don't think it's half-hearted. I think it's half-funded.
But I mean, that could one could lend itself to the other, though.
True.
But I kind of wonder if it might be something more fundamental, because from what I understand, Scott Buck, the showrunner, he's done a lot of his work. I think was on Dexter in television. I know that he's written several episodes of Dexter, and I think he co-wrote the full finale. But I'm not putting that on him. I mean, but he's done Dexter. He's done some of Rome. I know he did 6 Feet Under. Iron Fist seems like kind of a stretch when you consider the totality of his work before. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't necessarily indicate anything on its own, because Melissa Rosenberg didn't have a lot of experience with superheroes. Right. I guess she had some experience on Birds of Prey, but that was still a compelling series because it embraced the characters, and it showed us a new side to a degree, or in some respects a side that comic book fans know really well, of characters that we have seen on a pretty consistent basis for most of the last decade. But I mean, Stephen DeKnight, he came from a far more familiar place as far as the storytelling that he would do, just based on Spartacus alone. And he had done some work. He cut his teeth, I think, on Smallville. He worked on Buffy and Angel, so there's already experience from a guy like Joss Whedon, and he obviously knew what he was doing with Daredevil. And Chio Coker, I was so taken in before Luke Cage came out with how connected he seemed to be to the character. I mean, he seemed to have a significant amount of passion for representing Luke Cage well in his first solo endeavor, and that automatically endeared me to him. But I mean, I don't know if you guys have watched Ray Donovan very much, but I know that he wrote some episodes of Ray Donovan, and I think he also worked on like NCIS. So I mean, in most of these cases, the showrunners have familiarity, at least, with superhero-type storytelling. And with Scott Buck, you don't really get... Dexter can come close sometimes, but I kind of get the impression that he is having ideas for modern superhero stories that people were having in the year 2000, which comes with a degree of timidity in representing the source material. And maybe he'll take things a little bit further in the second season. I mean, I'm a little bit disconcerted by Finn Jones saying we're not going to see Danny Rand's costume for a long time.
No.
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's the thing where I don't want to put too much of this on Scott Buck, because even to a certain extent in Daredevil, like, even though he had a costume, like, it took them all the way till the last half hour of the first season to get Matt Murdock into a costume,
into this familiar one. Yeah,
and it took it took also the same length of time to get Punisher into a T-shirt in Daredevil season 2. So there seems to be some strange kind of aversion to costumes on the Marvel Netflix stuff, and they both gave you those payoffs, though. Yes, they did it. They eventually did it, and that's why I think you can't. I don't think it should take. I mean, if movies are able to get a hero in the costume within 40 minutes to an hour, in origin stories, I think you should be able to get your guys into costume, your characters into costume in less than 13 hours. I think you should be able to do that. I understand that it's longer form storytelling, and you are allowed to let things breathe and sit for longer stretches of time before you get into it, and that's fine. I'm totally on board with that idea, but at the same time, like, you shouldn't push that too far. And if Danny Rand still doesn't have, and granted, his costume may never be what it is in the comics, but if he doesn't have some form of costume by Defenders, which at that point it's 21 hours of Danny Rand and we wouldn't have him in a costume, I would mark that down as a problem. And look, I don't know, like, these breakdowns that happen with this show, I always hesitate. I know people look at the showrunner like, Scott Buck, and I know I've already seen some Marvel fans worried, well, he's also the showrunner on Inhumans, so what's going to happen with that? And I don't feel like any of these things are ever one person's fault, especially in the medium of television, where there's just so much collaboration and there's notes coming from different places and all of that.
Sure.
So I would hesitate to really, hang whatever the shortcomings are for Iron Fist
solely on one person.
Yeah, I can't.
I
can't
can
hang
understand that.
Yeah, I can't hang that on any one person, and that's why I'm not like, my enthusiasm for Inhumans hasn't dampened, because I love that property and I can't wait to see what they do with it. And I do believe that they would do better with a season 2 of Iron Fist. I think this was probably a learning experience. I think this was something that, they did. It maybe got a little bit away from them in some places, and they tried their best to kind of rein it in. But I think they would I think they would come into a second season with a better plan of action going into it that would lead to something more successful. But what you really need is Danny Rand to kind of have a star turn now in the Defenders. Like, he can't, based on the Solo series, he's the weak link. He can't be the weak link when they all get together. And, as long as he has a good showing there, then I think you're going to see strong interest for, really strong interest for season 2. I should also mention, Netflix doesn't release their numbers for how many people watch the show, but actually, based on some third-party companies that research and try to project on Netflix Netflix views, according to them, and again, I don't know how great, and I can't remember the name of the company that's done it, but according to them, Iron Fist is the second fastest watched show behind only Luke Cage. So it was viewed faster and by more people than Daredevil and Jessica Jones. So I don't know if I don't know if that's because, well, I don't know if that's because now that there's just more people immediately on board with the Netflix shows, because keep in mind, not everybody was on board when those things first started. So now the Marvel Netflix stuff is more established, so that could explain why any potential new property, including like the two most recent shows, performed the best in their initial days of being available. So I don't know everything that goes into that. And again, those numbers aren't reported by Netflix, so I don't know if we can really even verify how accurate they are or not. But I think the demand for a second season of Iron Fist, if it's not there right now for a lot of people, it will be if Danny Rand has a great showing in Defenders, and that really can still happen. So, again, Iron Fist for me, to sum it up, it's not a total failure. I think there's good stuff to work with. I do think that Finn Jones, even though not everything worked, I don't think every element of his performance worked throughout this. I do think there are, creatively there were things that happened that didn't necessarily help him out the best, but there were elements to this, and there were definitely things that I liked. There were episodes that I liked. I think I liked, the 5th, 6th, 7th episodes, right kind of in the middle of the season, where it kind of hit a little bit of a sweet spot. So I know that there was great stuff to work with here. It's just a matter of accentuating those strengths going forward and leaving behind some of the waste that was there in this series. And I think they'll be able to do it, and I think it might help Danny Rand, it might help him out to be part of an ensemble to have that be his next thing. Kind of takes the pressure off that character, and he can just be Danny Rand and be a badass Iron Fist. And if all that comes together, then I think we could be set up very nice. And especially now with the tease of kind of Davos possibly being the lead villain in season 2, all the pieces are there to really turn this around and take it from something that was okay but not as great as it should have been to something that is on par with what Marvel and Netflix have basically gotten us to expect over the past couple years.
I just kind of hope that this isn't indicative of a larger trend. That's the only thing, because from the movie side of things, Marvel Studios has really been the driving force behind getting these iconic characters specifically to probably the most recognizable medium that we've ever seen between comics and other media. And, if you trace the quote-unquote modern age of comic book cinema specifically, it took us 12 years, and it took the Avengers to get us to almost one for one, especially when it comes to color. And, you look at the Avengers and you look at comic book movies that were developed and followed the Avengers, that was almost a dividing line between weird sort of okay but certainly partially unrecognizable takes on superhero visualizations to where we have them now. You compare Spider-Man and The Amazing Spider-Man, which came out the same year as Avengers, to the way he looked in Amazing Spider-Man 2. I would say that the huge jump in design comes from the confidence that the Avengers gave people overall. Same thing with Batman. You look at how he appeared in The Dark Knight Rises and in the Nolan trilogy overall, and you could debate till the cows come home about the quality of the movie, but we have a very visually recognizable Batman now, far more than we've ever had before. And of course, that's not going to be the key driving factor to what makes a show good. But to me, that's always been what has set Marvel apart, is that they had the confidence to fall back on the iconic character designs while also telling good stories. And it's disconcerting to me, that's all. It's disconcerting that Iron Fist seems to have a timidity that we haven't seen for over a decade. And I just hope it's not indicative of something larger.
I don't think that Iron Fist is a bad TV series. It's funny because I love Daredevil season 1 and 2. I think those are amazing seasons, and I am a little biased because I love Daredevil a lot as a character. I'm a big fan of the comic character, so take that for what you will. It's funny because I look at Jessica Jones. I think Jessica Jones had the best next villain besides the Kingpin. She had the best over long-term story. She had a terrible supporting cast, in my opinion. It was just the characters, the stories they tried to put in there just did not work, I think, in the long haul. And you look at Luke Cage. I think he had one of the worst overall stories, but he had one of the best supporting characters or the best supporting staff for his series, almost any of them, almost rivaling Daredevil, and it definitely lost steam once you relied more on the overall arcing story. And it was just kind of, for me, and this is all my opinion, not saying this is fact, obviously, but just for me, like I as soon as a certain character bites dust in Luke Cage and he becomes a major story, it just goes downhill from there, not in a good way. I think the one difference between all those other series that Iron Fist has is that it's just so inconsistent throughout the whole season. There's not really like one major thing that happens where I'm like, there it goes. That's exactly it. It's all over the place, and that's my main issue with it. I look at Danny Rand, Finn Jones' performance. I don't know if I can put that all on him because he's just doing what's on the page. He's also being, different directors too that are doing this and are directing him. And I felt that there are certain episodes he was really good in, and there are certain episodes he was terrible in. And I thought about, because I watched him in Game of Thrones. He was great as in that show as Loras, and he didn't have a huge role, but he never I thought gave a bad performance necessarily. So to me, when I watched the series, I immediately just thought, I'm like, I think the directors and the writing is letting the actor down a little bit, and I think it's showing in his performances. So I just felt like Iron Fist just wasn't the consistent show that at least you can kind of pinpoint different things, at least for me, even in Daredevil shows. You can pinpoint, where this could have gone, this is where it kind of went down a little bit, but it puts it right back up. Whereas Iron Fist is literally peaks and valleys for 12, 13 episodes, whatever it is. So I don't think it's a terrible peaks and valleys, but I think there's a lot to be done. And I really, really, really hope they can give him a costume in Defenders and have him do at least one more season. And, I'm not against the idea of doing the Heroes for Hire idea, of giving both Luke Cage and Iron, putting them together. Like, I think that'd be a great tandem. I mean, I bet Luke Cage was backhand Danny Rand at some point because how annoying he can be. But maybe that's what, Danny Rand needs. Maybe they need to let out some steam together and fight.
Danny Rand is prone to hissy fits. If there was my biggest criticism of Finn Jones' performance is not so much the martial arts stuff, which I frankly think they just didn't give him the help he needed, like a costume as an actor, a place to, an easy way of getting a stuntman in to make him look better. Because I have no illusions that Charlie Cox, Chris Evans, or any of these guys are really all that great at martial arts. Like, I think that, I'm not saying they're all equally bad and that some of them aren't more passable than others, but all of them need help, and they get help via stuntmen who are easy to hide in costumes. And when you have no costume, that gets very, very difficult. And I think that for Finn Jones, they didn't do him any favors. So, but performance-wise, like, there was a lot. Like I said, there was a lot that I liked. There was a lot that just seemed like completely the right vibe for Danny Rand that I was totally into with Finn Jones. But then there were just other moments where I felt like he was kind of relying too much on the rage that's inside him. Like, for a guy who's supposed to be very, very zen, like, he didn't come across that way. Like, there were a lot of things a lot of choices that they made with the character, and some of that I think is Finn Jones and his performance, and not just the writing, where there were times where I just wasn't convinced that this guy ever would have become Iron Fist. So, that he would have ever been chosen. I wasn't fully understanding why, and some of that was, again, with Finn Jones always kind of going in and getting all mad and breathing hard for a second and then calming down. So there was some of that just wasn't quite working. But but like I said, I already kind of summed up my thoughts on Iron Fist. I think there's a lot here that I'll still go back to and watch in the show. I just won't watch all of it. I'll just kind of skim to these parts that I like, and I do wish overall the show had been better, but but that's going to happen. Nobody bats 1,000. So I still have a lot of faith in Marvel and specifically Marvel Television and Netflix, because they've done such a great job with these shows so far. They had 4 really great seasons of television before this, and even though this one was a little bit of a letdown, I'm still way excited for Defenders and Inhumans, and I've been loving this season of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., even though it's not Netflix. Like, I'm into this, and I think they're doing a lot of great stuff, and that this one just maybe got away from them a little bit, but I think they'll come back strong. Like, I think Defenders will go back to what we've come to expect from Marvel and Netflix. So, if they're down right now, and I'm not really convinced that they are, but even if we want to say that they are, they're going to bring it right back up with Defenders. I have a lot of faith that that's going to happen.
Hear, hear.
Yes.
Yeah. And I guess on that note, that will wrap up this edition of Marvel News. If you want to keep up with the show, you can do that on Twitter at Marvel Newscast or on the website, marvelstudiosnews.com. And if you want to keep up with superhero news, you can do that at Superhero News CB on Twitter or superheronews.com or on YouTube, where I co-host the Superhero News Show with Mark Hughes and also do trailer reactions like the Spider-Man Homecoming trailer, youtube.com/superhero news. My liege, where can everybody keep up with you?
Jeez.
At Chris Clow on Twitter. You can find me on Facebook and friend me there. Check out my podcast website, comicsonconsoles.com. I'm getting ready to release issue number 9, which focuses on Watchmen: The End Is Nigh pretty soon.
And Paul, where can everybody find you?
Everyone can find me on Twitter at Herman22, aka P-Thug. You can find me also on my other Star Wars podcast, Blaster Canon. That's Canon with a C-A-N-O-N. We just recorded an episode and got released, I think, last month, and we're recording another episode here in a couple weeks or next week. So I'll have an episode before a Star Wars Celebration, which I will be at, and if you will be there, look me up. I'll say hi and give you a high five.
He might even give you a hug. But don't forget, when you search for Herman22 on Twitter, that's with 2 N's, which Paul
that's true. I almost forgot. How could I forget?
I'm looking out for your brand even when you're not. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, I don't know why you would, but in case you do, you can do that at Mr. Sean Gerber, Sean spelled S-E-A-N. So for Chris and Paul, I'm Sean. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.